Good evening, class, and welcome to this episode of Real Review, the History of Cinema 101. The idea for cinema came from the moving panorama, which was shown at the World Fair at the turn of the 19th century. And here is a video clip showing what exactly these devices were.
Faraday's wheel, Joseph Plateau in Brussels, and Simon Stampfer in Vienna invent the phenakistoscope independently of one another in 1832. Stampfer called it the stroboscope. In England, it was known as the phantoscope. This disc demonstrates continuous movement for the first time. Comparable to film because it uses minimal differences between the images to create the illusion of movement.
So basically animation on a wheel. You used to look through a hole in a wheel and spin the wheel and it would create a moving picture. Now, many inventors were trying to create a camera that would have moving pictures in it. We obviously had stills cameras at the time, and from the United States across to the Atlantic in Europe, many inventors were trying to create the camera, but nobody knows exactly who the first inventors were. But it was the Lumiere brothers who created the first short film and got it out before anybody else, which was just basically a train coming at the camera, which they set up at a train station, which was shown in Paris in the early 20th century. And here is a clip from that short film. True story. The people in the cinema actually ran out of the cinema because they were terrified that the train was actually going to come out of the screen into the audience. Running gag in modern cinema these days with films like The A-Team, where they actually do it in the movie, where a four driver is coming at the screen and comes out into the hospital in the movie. But it wasn't until they could make films commercially viable that cinema really took off, and they needed to do this by creating like narratives and feature films. So the first multi-reel film that was ever produced was actually produced right here in my country, the story of the Kelly Gang, and the only surviving footage of it is shown here in this clip.
Armour, which was borrowed for the occasion from Sir Rupert Clarke. This Kelly feature was an interesting departure from previous movie newsreels and actualities, but until the 1970s, these fictional films were only a tiny percentage of the film produced locally. Newsreels and documentaries exceeded the footage released in narrative features by a factor of 5 to 1 or more. Most of the really polished Australian productions made in those early days were short, non-fiction efforts. It's very difficult to gain any overview of the Australian film production industry before the First World War, as only about 5% of the prints are known to survive today. We're fortunate.
So that was the early cinema. But the Americans did it best, and they created the first movie star in Charlie Chaplin. But obviously, what they needed to make films commercially viable was sound, by matching up what the actors were saying to what was on the screen, because they were just using cards and a lot of action and spoof. That's why Charlie Chaplin became so popular, because it was all like slapstick comedy. It was all over the top. But they needed to create that nuance. And it wasn't until the invention of the first talkie that the jazz singer in 1927 that had a budget of $442,000 US and took in $2.6 million at the box office, adjusted for inflation. That's $7.7 million today, but $5.5 million at the box office. So here is a clip from that film. So they still use cards.
That's what they say, but to me, he's an angel.
So this was a seminal moment in history. People were amazed.
Wait a minute. You ain't heard nothing yet. Wait a minute, I tell you. You ain't heard nothing. You want to hear Toot Toot Tootsie? All right, hold on. No, listen. Play Toot Toot Tootsie. 3 choruses, you understand? And the third.
I think I got the idea there. That was, and a little known fact, the movie Singing in the Rain, the classic, was about this adjustment from silent films to talkies. And what happened was a lot of famous actors from the silent era lost their jobs and their fame because they had terrible voices, and you'll see that in the movie. The next great invention was obviously color. There was a British man in the early 20th century in 1906 that created a short film that was in color, but he couldn't quite get the color to project up on the screen. So they went back and fixed it in digital in the 21st century. And here is some of that. No, I don't have that actually. But anyway, but it wasn't until The Wizard of Oz in 1939, which was the first feature-length film to use color footage, that this became popular. The Wizard of Oz had a production value of $2.8 million, and it took in $29.7 million at the box office. Adjusted for inflation, this is about $61.2 million for the budget, and $649.8 million, so over $500 million at the box office, which isn't bad in revenue taking. The next big invention, I would say, in my personal opinion, is depth of field, which was created by the auteur Orson Welles, who was one of the hardest working filmmakers in cinema at the time. And it was also the first film to use where you could see the roofs, because they used to hang the microphones down from the roof in old talkies, but they were able to create booms and hold them out of sight from the actors so they could talk. So here's a clip from that movie.
To the Chronicle policies, as they are now to our policies?
Sure, they're just like anybody else. They got work to do, they do it. Only they happen to be the best men in the business. Maybe that was something he lost. Mr. Kane was...
So before this, they either had to focus on the foreground or the background. They couldn't get the entire shot in focus, so they had to create special lenses and special camera bodies to be able to do this.
Was a man who lost almost everything he had. You want to see Jed Leland. Of course, he and Mr. Kane didn't exactly see eye to eye. You take the Spanish-American War. I guess Mr. Leland was right. That was Mr. Kane's war. We didn't really have anything to fight about. But do you think if it hadn't been for that war of Mr. Kane's, we'd have the Panama Canal? I wish I knew where Mr.
The next big invention, I believe, was the Steadicam, which is used throughout cinema today. It was invented by a guy called Garrett Brown, specifically for the film Rocky, which was made in 1976, which unbelievably only had a budget of $960,000 US, but took in $225 million. So in today's money, that's only $5.1 million to make, and it took over $1 billion at the box office. This margin is unbelievable. Sylvester Stallone was so thing about being in the film, and he wrote the script actually, so he's a very smart man. They weren't going to put him in the film, and he kept going to different production houses, and he got so poor that he had to sell his dog to be able to buy his next meal. And when the film came out, which he took a percentage of the box office, he was able to buy his dog back later, which was a nice thought. But here is a clip of Garrett Brown testing out the Steadicam.
We'll see in this bit of film that I still have, and there it is. There I am running around in a field, exhilarated as hell because it actually works. And so just before I left, we got a slate. I said, Ellen, let's run down here. You run down, I'll follow you down. So
this is Garrett Brown's wife. So she was the first person to ever run up and down the steps of the History Museum in Philadelphia, even before Sylvester Stallone. And now, apparently, when anybody ever goes to Philadelphia and they go to this spot, they all want to run up and down it. So I'm sure there's hundreds of thousands of people running up and down these stairs every day, and they don't know the significance of this moment. Well, now you do.
And then we're done, and I can go to LA. By God, she ran down those steps like a gazelle, and I had a burst of adrenaline. I followed her all the way down, and it was good. It was really good. It was better than the other stuff with the older rig. Even though it was lighter, it was more stable, which was amazing to me. And I didn't fall down, which was great. And then she ran back up, and I ran all the way back up after. I kind of ran out of steam about the last landing. There are a lot of steps in the Art Museum. I mean, then that was just the Art Museum. Now it's an icon. Thousands of people run up and down that place, and it's become a symbol of something, personal achievement, or having accomplished something, or even just the dream of doing so. But just then, it was just us.
And here is a clip of Sylvester Stallone actually doing it for this cinema. I had to cut out the sound because it was music, so I don't want to get copyrighted. So that's the final product of Steadicam, and now it's used in so many different movies. Great achievement for cinema and great achievement for, the history of cinema. So I would say the next big invention was CGI for Terminator 2 in 1991. The filmmakers had to wait for the technology to catch up with the ideas for their script. Obviously, the original Terminator was made, in the early 80s, 83, 84. But they had to wait. They actually had to invent some of the computers which could create the CGI. And it was the first feature film to have a budget of $100 million on the nose, but it took in $520.9 million at the box office. Adjusted for inflation, this is $223.2 million in today's money, but over $1.1 billion at the box office globally. So here is a clip of some of the CGI examples from the movie. Unbelievable effects. So I think the next big invention is obviously deep fake. So this is forgot to mention bullet time. So bullet time was used in the Matrix. So I think that this was probably it wasn't really an invention, but more of a technique. The reason it's called bullet time is because you slowed down the action of the cinema or the actors as well. And they were able to do this with real life bullets by slowing the film down inside the camera, like the frames per minute per second, because it's 25 frames per second. So in order to do this, you actually have to speed up how many you have to speed up this. Anyway, here is an example of the bullet time from The Matrix.
Of the directors observing the controls coming into place, and then they ask the right question at the right time. You always know that you're doing something that is groundbreaking. If someone
So see how the camera rigs around the actor. So what they were actually doing is taking just a shot on each camera, like in sequence, like milliseconds. But it starts with the first camera and goes all the way around, so it looks like one shot. And then you see that in the movie if you haven't seen The Matrix. I don't know what rock you've been living under.
I'm going to ask something that you go, maybe, if we do some development and get the right minds working on it, and it takes some pretty heavy thinking to get it together.
Yeah, so that was the idea. So yeah, like I said, I think the next big step in cinema is deep fake. However, I am quite concerned about this innovation because it takes away creative control from the actors, not so much the filmmakers. I think that it's important to have as much in-camera effects as possible, whether that's flying a plane, depending on your budget, obviously. But obviously with the Top Gun Maverick, because it's Tom Cruise, the last movie star, he was able to create a budget where they actually shot inside fighter jets. All the actors were inside fighter jets, so it was in camera technology. But also for the actors, say you want an actor to cry on cue. You don't want to have to create those tears in CGI. You need the actors to be able to convey that energy, and it's also good for the actors. And also new stars coming up, because we've already seen films like Rogue One and Gladiator use this technology to insert dead actors into their films, and I guess that's okay if you're making a sequel or stuff. But like new films, like I thought it would be exciting to see maybe Marilyn Monroe act opposite Arnold Schwarzenegger, but I don't think that's a good thing anymore, because we want to foster real talent with real human beings. And the other thing is, so when you're an actor, you have to sign release forms in order for the production company to use your image as you see fit. Now, I think with release forms in the future, you're going to have to add these into your contract so that if you don't want the producers to ever use your performances or your skills in future films on other people who don't know how to use the skills that you developed over a lifetime, like Jet Li. He's very, very picky on doing films now and showing off his martial arts, because obviously he trains from the age of probably 5 to get to where he is now as a black belt, and his skills are it's all in his body. And to put that on another person who hasn't had the training, I think it's a cop out. So I think he's a very smart man. But here is an example of deep fake with Arnold Schwarzenegger in No Country for Old Men. It's
Y'all getting any rain up your way?
What way would that be?
I seen you was from Dallas.
What business is it of yours? Where I'm from? Friendo.
I didn't mean nothing by it.
Didn't mean nothing.
Just passing the time. If you don't want to accept that, I don't know what else I can do for you. Will it be something else?
I don't know. Will there?
So as you can see, it's quite realistic, which is funny because these clips are meant to be funny, but it also takes away from the performance of the original actors who were in these. And the problem with release forms these days is, so somebody obviously, like if they're smart enough, they can create that in their basement. So how do you, police the whole world from deep fake? So you may be wondering why I add in all these budgets and box office takings and adjust them for inflation. The reason I do that is because I believe that modern cinema, isn't being created to create a type of profit. They're creating films for ideological reasons to brainwash people, and I believe this to be wrong. What we need is not a lot of content, but new content. So I'm sick of all these remakes and franchises and sequels. We don't need those. What we need is original content. So because what I always learned at film school is in order to break the rules, you have to know what the rules are, right? So a lot of filmmakers these days, like a lot of the young people that I know, some of them know some of the stuff that I showed you, but not other stuff. They don't know everything, but I'm a lover of cinema. So I go right into the history of it. And so they don't even know 80% of what I've just told you. So what we need to do is create, because there's so much content from the late 19th, 20th century to the 21st century, and obviously with YouTube and stuff like this, there's so much to view, and obviously with inflation, we can't afford to keep pumping out just crap, right? So what we need stuff that is people want to watch, that has no ideological bent in it. And anyway, so I think I think that's important. So like for example, here is an example of where they use old ideas in cinema, in modern films, from a film made in early 20th century Russia to late 20th century America, the Battleship Potemkin, which is a Russian film, to the Untouchables, and it was exactly kind of the same idea. So yeah, very everything old is new again. But we haven't been seeing this because they've been doing too much woke ideological stuff and not focusing on profits. And I don't understand why the head executives of these companies keep doing this when they know that people aren't coming to see the cinema. And there's no excuse, because every time there's a Tom Cruise film on, or something which is just traditional cinema like Extraction 2 on Netflix, it gets massive views. Now, I don't have anything against these films, but they're still popcorn like films. I want to see stuff like the old Godfather films, like I want to see movies like this. I'm just so sick of this woke ideological stuff. Anyway, thank you for joining me this week on Real Review, and I will see you next time. And remember to keep the real real.